So I'm going to do about probably a 10-minute overview of the city's implementation of the voter-approved charter reforms. And then Leah from the county is going to talk about the county's administration of the city's first ranked choice voting election. And then we should have time for questions and discussion at the end. So just to give some political context within which this project occurred, on November 8th, 2022, as you've heard, Portlanders overwhelmingly voted to overhaul our form of government and our election system. And the very next day, the city began the implementation, what we call the transition at the city. And having voters overwhelmingly approve a new form of government and election system also means that they're disapproving of our current form of government and election system and the leaders. So we're kind of in a unique spot as city staff where the city council, who's now tasked with overseeing the implementation, kind of just got voted out by the people, and a majority of our city council publicly opposed charter reform. So about 6 months into our transition, two of our current sitting city council members publicly floated proposals that would alter the voter-approved charter reforms. And then we had 4/5 of our city council were running for office in the new form of government that they publicly opposed. So I just want to share that as some context within which we at this city were working. So I am going to do some high-level lessons learned that are really fresh that our team has been thinking of over the last few weeks, high-level project milestones, budget, evaluation, and then I'll just end with the work ahead. So next slide, please. So our team right now is writing a report about all the work we've done, and we hope that it is a tool for other communities and jurisdictions who might be undertaking this work. These lessons learned are really for communities and jurisdictions looking at large-scale, complex, time-limited public processes. So it doesn't have to be exactly what Portland did, but any sort of large-scale change you might be considering in your community, we hope that these are applicable to you. So first, create and communicate a unified, detailed living project plan. So project planning really needs to begin before the election, even if you're uncertain about the election's outcome. And all work has to adhere to this plan. So when you have complex plans of this nature, it's really best to have a unified plan and not sort of 10 project plans for each discrete component of the project. An evaluative framework for the project should be in place from the get-go, and the plan should be well communicated both inside the jurisdiction and outside within community so that the city or the jurisdiction can be held accountable for adhering to the plan. The second is to secure internal leadership that champions the project and commits to shared values. So leadership from across the organization is important. Preferably you have elected officials who will champion the work, and also leaders within the bureaucracy who will champion the work and who will be consistent about applying a set of shared values. Third is to plug the project into an existing community engagement framework. I know on the panel I was on last night, Jenny was sort of talking about the benefit of maintaining relationships through this entire process. The city often doesn't do that. It starts a project and it's like, who are the relationships? Who are the stakeholders? And it's like you begin every massive project as if no projects had happened before. And when you have such a time-limited project like this, that's incredibly detrimental. And it leads to really inefficient and ineffective community engagement. Fourth is to partner with community and resource those communities. So if you're undertaking a project like this, it's likely that it came from a community call for action. It's likely that there is community momentum with on which the project should build. And I can tell you at this city is better reaching parts of our community than other parts. So in order to reach all of our community, the city needs to give money to community-based organizations who can reach the parts of our community that the city is less good at reaching. And another thing, the pace of this project was intense, and we had to get it done in 2 years, according to the ballot measure. But there still needs to be consideration of the pacing of the work. You know, how do you pace the work from a government perspective that allows communities capacity to participate in the project? Fifth is to form a project advisory body. So this is a group of community members who hopefully can provide some oversight of the government's work itself. One of the best benefits of advisory bodies is transparency. So they bring a sort of openness to community about the work. You just don't have city workers kind of working internally, and you don't get to see any of it if you're not within the city. I think also advisory bodies are better able to recognize a jurisdiction's inclination to maintain itself and the status quo, which I do think large organizations like a city have a tendency to do, even during a period of significant transformation and reform. So 6 is, how do you sustain the project leadership and internal collaboration? There are 7,500 people who work at the city of Portland. Some sit in an office and have a computer, some never do, right? And that all are impacted by the change at this scale. So how are you engaging folks horizontally across the organization and vertically up and down? And how are those folks working together? For us, as we started to divide our government into 2 distinct branches, the executive branch and the legislative branch, how are those branches not siloing, and how do they show up in each other's decision-making spaces so you can accomplish a project of this scale? And finally, maybe my favorite, is I think projects like this need to be positioned in a long-term community vision. Now, one might have been sort of articulated in the reform effort itself, but there are a lot of unexpected things that happen in a project like this. Not all decisions are clear. And so if you have the long-term vision that's community informed, it can help guide those times of uncertainty. It could be a strategic plan for your jurisdiction. It could be a long-term evaluative framework for the reforms, but something so that the project can always be in service to that long-term community vision. So next, I'm going to breeze through the significant amount of work we did. This is the year 1 timeline. I will say, reflecting back, the work that we began the day after the election were 2 things. 1, recruiting the Independent District Commission responsible for establishing geographic districts for our new city council. Those had to be in place. Not only was there a deadline in the new charter for it, but candidates need to know where the districts are so they can run for office. Absolute priority. The second one was amending the city's elections code to align with ranked choice voting so that our friends at the county who are responsible for administering our election had the guidance they needed to do their work. Those were absolutely the first things we did the day after the election. So by the end of the first year, we had established geographic districts through the work of the Independent District Commission. We had established salaries for all new elected officials through the work of a salary commission. We had an advisory body up and running. The elections code was amended to align with ranked choice voting. The code that governs how our council operates was amended so that the new city council would know how to do their work day 1. And we adopted a new organizational structure that could report up to a city administrator. Next slide. So this is year 2. We did a lot of code revisions. So rewriting the city's laws to align with the new charter. Voters were educated about ranked choice voting that you've heard a lot about. We test ran the new organizational structure that reported up to a city administrator. Our city hall was renovated. So as you've heard, we only had 5 city councilors before. Now we have 12, and we didn't have a city hall to fit them. And our city hall is a historic building. So City Hall was renovated during this second year. And in November of 2024, Portlanders had their first ranked choice voting election for the mayor, the auditor, and all 12 of our city councilors. Then the city actually did an onboarding process for those elected officials, which the city doesn't have much of a history of doing. And it was a much more robust onboarding process than has happened in the past. And on January 1st, 2025, the new mayor and councilors and auditor entered the new form of government into their new roles and responsibilities. The new council had their first meeting on January 2nd, 2025. They elected the first ever council president and vice president in the system. And I think maybe 2 weeks later, formed the first policy committees of the new government. Next slide, please. How much does it cost? We're still figuring it out. We're not quite done our current fiscal year. We're currently at about 17 million. And if folks want to kind of dive into any of these line items later, I'm happy to do it. The largest line item for us was the renovations of City Hall at about 8.3 million, and we're still trying to figure out exactly the cost. I will say, just like when you do kind of, if you've ever done renovations in your house or you know someone who has, it's also an opportunity to take care of some maintenance that you haven't been doing. So the city also paid for some things that aren't just about like expanding the city council chambers, but maybe we need a new HVAC system, right? So that's some of that line item. And the next largest line item is personnel costs. So this is city staff responsible for managing the project, which cost us about 5 million. Next slide. We're also currently working on evaluation. So this is not evaluation of the long-term impacts of charter reform, which we think should be done. This is how do we evaluate whether we were successful as a city at implementing voter-approved charter reform. And some of the questions we're asking ourselves, you can see on here, did we do it on time? Did we do it on budget? Are internal and external stakeholders satisfied with the communications we had, with the engagement that we had? And another question, a little bit trickier to get at, is do Portlanders believe that the changes we've made are going to improve the functioning of the city and improve city service delivery in our communities? Next slide. This is my final slide. The work's not over. So we're kind of concluding as a transition team at the city. We've checked the boxes at things with hard deadlines in the voter-approved charter amendments, but we have a whole host of activities that we're passing off to other folks in the city right now. Certainly ongoing voter education about ranked choice voting. You don't just get to educate voters for the first election and say that you're done, right? And we have a lot of data to learn from 2024 about how to improve upon that next time around. How can we provide even better onboarding for both the next elected officials and their staff who are still entering a new form of government where roles and responsibilities are being figured out? We already have to start planning for the next charter-related bodies. The Salary Commission meets every 2 years to set the salaries of elected officials. The next Charter Commission, which has to be impaneled in 5 years, and the next Independent District Commission to reconsider the geographic districts of our council. I mentioned this before, but also how and when do we evaluate the long-term impacts of the reforms? Becca shared this morning what some of the desired outcomes of the Charter Commission were. What's the framework by which we're going to judge that? Accountability for making progress on the advisory body's recommendations. I was just talking to someone in the audience during the break about this. We had an advisory body. It recently ended. What happens with their work? Does it go on a shelf, right? Or how do we incorporate it into the new system where there's some responsibility of the city administration for reporting on the progress they're making to the city council on those recommendations? And then the organizational structure that the city has in place is not perfect. It was never meant to be perfect or the structure that will exist for the entirety of this form of government. It was the first stab, and it will evolve. So what is the mechanism for knowing how and when to do that? And then finally, just ongoing change management. As I mentioned before, there's 7,500 people who work at the city of Portland. There's a whole culture, right? And the cultures actually are different across those 7,500 folks. So that ability to manage change doesn't just stop January 1st when our new folks entered office. So I'm going to turn it to Leah, but I'll just say, I felt like we didn't have a lot of blueprints when we did this work, either the charter review process itself or the implementation. We've learned things, we did some things right, some things wrong, but I really do hope, and I offer to those not in Portland, if we can be a resource to you, we're here to do that. So thank you.
Okay, thank you, Julia. Again, my name is Leah Benson. I'm the Ranked Choice Voting Project Manager for Multnomah County elections. Just a reminder, in the state of Oregon, the counties administer elections on behalf of the jurisdictions within them. Since the city of Portland is largely within Multnomah County, we administered the first ranked choice voting elections for the city of Portland. So I'm here today to give that election administrator perspective for what needed to happen in order for us to administer our first ranked choice contests. Both useful in terms of telling the full picture to our community here in Portland, but also for folks from other jurisdictions who are curious about what this would take to be able to implement where they live. One thing I'll say with that is I'm going to talk about some challenges, because the reality is this is hard. That said, important work is usually pretty challenging. It's not a bad thing that it was hard, and it's not bad to acknowledge that either. Similar to what Julia said, the big things that made it hard were not having a playbook to tell us exactly what to do and having that really quick timeline to get the work done. But spoiler alert, it all worked. We were able to successfully administer, yeah, thank you. We're proud for everyone in this room making it happen. We were able to successfully administer all 6 of the ranked choice voting contests, the 2 with a single winner, and the 4 for proportional ranked choice voting, able to report results on time, and it went well. So I want to talk a little bit about the work that needed to be done to get us there. So first, with laying the groundwork, as Julia said, as soon as the election was over, we got to work with the city of Portland. The first and most necessary step being to write the city elections code. So we knew exactly how we were going to be administering these elections, telling us the rules for how voters' ranks would be interpreted, things like overvotes, how we would deal with those, or skipped rankings. Once we had the election code defined, the next thing we needed to move on to is an intergovernmental agreement, or IGA. What a beautiful term of art. So we needed to create an intergovernmental agreement with our 2 neighboring counties, Clackamas and Washington, because small percentages of City of Portland voters live in those 2 counties as well. And we needed to have Multnomah County act as the central tabulator for the ranked choice voting contests. There was not a precedent for this, and so we had to draw up a beautiful but very lengthy agreement for exactly how those 3 counties would work together, which went exactly according to plan in November, and we plan to do the exact same thing moving forward. But it was a collaboration between Multnomah County, Washington County, and Clackamas in getting this all done. The third very crucial thing that we did is recognize with humility that we would not become experts in all things ranked choice voting overnight. And so we asked for help early and often. One of the most crucial parts of our implementation was working with the Ranked Choice Voting Resource Center. Shout out, Chris, we love you. They were there along with us every step of the way, providing just key advice to make sure that we were learning from best practices, and when we crossed a new bridge, that they were helping us come up with new rule sets. Next slide, please. Okay, once we got those 3 pieces out of the way, we moved on to the biggest single challenge of ranked choice voting implementation. Who here is familiar with the term voting system software? Of course you are, Paul. Okay. So voting system software is the term that we use for the software that is used to count and tabulate elections. This is not unique to ranked choice voting. It's software that's used in all of our elections. And as one might hope and expect, there is a very rigorous testing process to be able to use any of this software for any election. The first challenge that we ran into was that we did not have any software that could effectively count and tabulate ranked choice voting contests, either single or multi-winner. And so we needed to work with our software vendor to draft an entirely new software for us to be able to run this election. Now, one thing to note is there are softwares out there that were pre-existing that could have counted multi-winner ranked choice contests. However, certification happens at a multitude of different levels, including the state level, and none of those softwares were certified within the state of Oregon, which is why we needed to start from scratch to have an entirely new software built. For anyone that's worked around software, 2 years is a very tight timeline for building an entirely new software that has a very important purpose. And so we got to work with them immediately doing the technical build for this. And Clear Ballot, who we worked with, did a phenomenal job of immediately building something up for us. And from there, they got it into federal testing as soon as possible. Federal testing is done at certified voting system software laboratories, where they do immense amounts of testing to make sure that it's not only mathematically precise, but that the software can perform in wild circumstances. For instance, if the room overheats to over 100 degrees, is the software going to stop working? If the power cuts out and we need to use a generator, will the software keep working? So it went through all of these rigorous tests, and then it was handed back to us at the elections division, where we were given a demo version so that we could do internal testing. And then we did everything we could to break the software. And we did multiple times, which is a good thing, because we wanted to find all of the stress points so that we could figure out how to fix them. To test this, we created several sample elections where we designed ballots, we tested the counting, we tested the results reporting, and we even tested the veracity of the results through a hand count of them, which I'll get into in a little bit. Oh, you can go back to the last slide, though. You're getting a little ahead of me. I like that, though. The final thing that we did then was state certification. This point I do want to really bring home, because state certification was the last hoop that we needed to jump through. This happened after all of that rigorous federal and then internal testing that was done over the summer of 2024. And on August 29th, 2024, we received certification at the state level from the Oregon Secretary of State that we could use the software. It's great news, and I point this out to say, again, let's lead with, we were able to do this, it was successful, it was wonderful. However, we needed to start building ballots and the election the very next week. So this was a very, very, very tight timeline for getting this work done. Next slide. Back to the hand count procedure. So we'd cleared that major hurdle of the voting system software. Another one that we had to contend with in the state of Oregon is making sure that we were going to be able to count any of these contests by hand. According to Oregon state statute, all recounts must be done by hand, which meant that we had to draft a procedure for counting a multi-winner ranked choice voting contest with proportional transfer, so that in the event of either a demand, meaning if a candidate requests it, or an automatic recount, meaning that it's triggered because it's within a certain margin, that we would be able to count the entire contest by hand. This was not something that existed anywhere that we could find in the United States. We did find a procedure in Scotland that we were able to build off of. And our office, in really close collaboration with the Ranked Choice Voting Resource Center, drafted a whole procedure for how you could count one of these contests by hand and tested it multiple times, culminating in a large-scale testing event last summer, where we did a test count of a 5,000 ballot contest. And the sample that we did was for District 2 of City of Portland. We were able to prove, yes, you can do a hand count of a PRCV contest, but also, yes, it does take a lot of work. We estimated that if we were going to have to do this in real life, it would probably take about 3 months of 7 days a week labor from people to count, but we could do it and it would be precise, which is the most important thing. Next slide, please. Moving on, with election building and ballot design, in order to do both ranked choice and first past the post or plurality contests, as they're often known, we needed to build two separate elections. So we essentially needed to run two elections at the same time, which meant doing back-end work of getting multiple servers up and running so that we could have two elections that ran concurrently and weren't in competition with each other, designing an entirely new type of ballot, which is something that is done using the voting system software. It's not something where we can use design software outside of that. It's very prescribed by what is in the software. So we got to play around a lot and figure out what the best design could look like, including what the instructions would look like, along with really careful and wonderful support from Center for Civic Design to make sure that our instructions were as understandable as possible. Next slide. Next thing we worked on was results reporting formats. We understood that ranked choice voting results look entirely different than the election results that most people are used to looking at. And so we chose to develop 3 different results reporting formats, developed on reports from New York City, from Minneapolis, and from Arlington, Virginia, all of whom have ranked choice voting contests. And we presented this in 3 different ways because we wanted to have different granularities of information and different visuals to allow all sorts of different audiences to hopefully be able to understand and interpret the election results. And for these results, we made the decision to begin posting full round-by-round tabulation on election night, which was a real debate in our office. I think because in jurisdictions that implement ranked choice voting, everyone does a little bit differently. A lot of jurisdictions will wait until they've received all of the ballots to present tabulation. However, we decided as a universal vote by mail state, our deadline for receiving ballots is not until a week after Election Day, and we did not want to wait that long to give people information. A core priority of our office is always transparency. And so we decided we wanted to be as transparent as possible as soon as we had data. And so we presented everything we had starting on election night, which we knew was a risk because it involved educating people on how to understand the results and making sure that they didn't view things as final on election night. We definitely have some space to grow there, but I think we did a pretty good job of working closely with the media to ensure that contests were not being called too soon. Next slide, please. I'll just go over this one quickly because I think there's been a lot of talk about it already. This is from the ballot data report that we produced that just shows the rate of voting errors. I have this in because this tends to be the most common question that we get from people, is did voters understand what did the errors look like? In general, what I can say is that the level of voting error for City of Portland contests was largely in line with what we see from other jurisdictions. That said, there were higher rates of overvotes for the multi-winner city council contests, and specifically in District 1. So this shows us where we need to provide more investment in the future in voter education and outreach, and doing the best that we can from the county end of things to make sure that all of our voters have the information that they need to make sure that their choice is fully and accurately expressed on the ballot. Next slide. Okay. So how was this election different? A quick rundown of the things that happened that were different and if RCV impacted that. I apologize, I know it's quite small up there, so I'll read through. Say, first, lower rate of voter participation. I know Andres spoke to this before, which was to say voter participation was lower, but it was lower across the board in the county, city, state, everywhere, likely not RCV. Later voter participation, potentially, we need to dig into that more. Increased ballot processing time, yes, absolutely, definitely. Much more complicated elections. Increased number of candidates, this is unclear. I put this in here because this is the #1 piece of feedback and frustration we heard from voters, was that there were too many candidates to choose from. So what we told them was, we can't say that this is because of the introduction of ranked choice voting. Portland contests have historically had a lot of candidates. We don't have primaries now, and so we're seeing all of those candidates at one time. That's an effect. We also didn't have any incumbents, so we're just gonna have to wait and see. The multi-page ballot, yes, we'll continue to see that in the future. And then finally, new results reporting needs, yes. So final slide, I think. Just a quick snapshot of implementation costs to end things with, in that this did have costs in terms of time and money. So overall, the cost was approximately $1.1 million to be able to implement ranked choice voting for the first time. In terms of one-time investments, that's about $350,000. That comes mostly from the purchase of the new voting system software and some of the results reporting that we did. But the bulk of these costs are anticipated ongoing expenses that we'll see every year, but especially every year that there is a ranked choice voting contest. Thank you. I think I'm really glad that we're able to have such a collaborative relationship with community partners. And as much as I would love to brag and take credit for that, I think it's much more the community partners than the elections division. I think similarly, we have firm lines drawn about what's been talked about already, like how much we can advocate for something versus inform about it. And we were constantly butting up against that concern. However, I think we were able to think through what we could say, what could be the most helpful, and what our boundaries were. And then anytime we were invited by a community organization, we let them know what our limitations were and boundaries were, and then we showed up to every single time anyone invited us to do anything. And that means people across the entire political spectrum. So I think realistically, it has less to do with the election administrators and more to do with the community inviting them to show up. And I think as long as you're honest about where your lines are and what you can and can't say, it's just showing up. I think even to be honest with Colin, for coming here today, we were like, I don't know. Is this the type of conference that an elections division can come to as administrators? You know, is it appropriate for us? And we decided, yes, I'm here. I'm giving you the facts. Everything I've shared with you is in an implementation report that we created and published on our website. All the details are there for public consumption. And if we can get in front of people to share our information about it, great.